Yesterday was December 19th. The weather was strange. There was no sun, but it wasn't dark either. The clouds hadn't fully claimed the sky. It felt as though light and shadow were locked in an undecided negotiation. People don't like this kind of weather. There's no rain, no clarity, only uncertainty. So the streets were empty. Everyone had retreated indoors. The city seemed to be hiding even from the shadow of the clouds. That's when I saw him, an albino man. Albinos are harmed by the sun. Light, for them, is not life, it's risk. Their skin, their eyes, their bodies are more vulnerable to brightness. That's why albinos don't sunbathe, at least not in the way we understand it. But this man was standing in the shade, and somehow he looked as though he was sunbathing there. That was the first thing that stopped my mind. He wasn't seeking refuge in the shadow. He was using it deliberately, like a chosen space, as if he wasn't rejecting light, but accepting it at the right distance. It was the posture of someone who knows that survival is not always about fleeing, but about finding the distance that works for you. I looked at his hands. They were covered in colorful rings, mismatched yet together. Too many, eye-catching, intentionally crowded. My gaze didn't go to his eyes. It landed on the rings. And then I realized this wasn't accidental. It was as if he were saying, if you're going to look at me, look first at what I've chosen. The rings were like a shield. They didn't hide his identity, but they didn't surrender it either. He was smoking a cigarette, slowly, with pleasure, at a rhythm that didn't recognize urgency. As the smoke rose, the city remained silent. People were inside, behind curtains, within the safe geometry of walls. He was outside, in the shade, but visible. And in that moment, I thought this: modern people seek light, but forget the cost of it. Everyone wants to shine. Everyone wants to be seen. But no one wants to learn how to live with the burning side of light. That albino man had learned it. That's why he didn't challenge the sun. That's why he didn't run from it either. He knew the limits of his own body and shaped his existence accordingly. People were fleeing from the rain. He was staying with possibility. And maybe that was real freedom, to remain there without putting yourself in danger, but without giving up on life either. December 19th made me think this: everyone wants the light, but some people exist more honestly in the shade. And sometimes someone standing in shadow is clearer than 1,000 people walking under the sun. When evening came, as always, I opened my history notebook. On the page for December 19th, one sentence stood out. December 19th, 1843. Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol was published. I paused, because there was an unexpected kinship between the man I had seen standing in the shade during the day and the story Dickens wrote. A Christmas Carol is often told as a story of light, Christmas lights, hope, transformation. But in truth, the book begins in darkness, with cold, with loneliness, with a man turned inward on himself. Scrooge is not simply someone who rejects the light. He is someone who refuses to pay the cost of it. Dickens understands this deeply. People are not afraid of darkness. They are afraid of being left in it. And transformation, as Dickens tells it, is not stepping suddenly into the light. It is first facing the shadow. I thought again of the albino man I saw earlier that day. He wasn't rejecting the light either, but he wasn't worshiping it. He knew that light is not the same for everyone. What is hope for one person can be a wound for another. That was Dickens's insight as well. He didn't divide people into good and evil. He wrote about people who stood at the wrong distance from the light. Scrooge didn't learn the light later in life. He learned the distance. And perhaps that is what real transformation is. Not living entirely in shadow, and not burning yourself in brightness. That day, the city had retreated indoors. People were hiding from the clouds. That man, however, stood in the shade and found his balance there. In my mind, Dickens's story and that moment came together in a single sentence. Light is for everyone, but it is not the same for everyone. And in the margin of my notebook, I wrote, "Some people burn in the sun, some heal in the shade. Wisdom is knowing which one you are."